Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arkansas. And welcome to the show. This is season number 1, episode 32. It is December 10th, 2016. Tonight, seeing as Christmas is coming and coming soon, we're going to talk a little bit about money. Money is not the root of all evil. It is the love of money that is the root of all evil. When money becomes more important than friends or family, you're taking a one-way trip on the downbound train. Money is something generally accepted as the medium of exchange, a measure of value, or a means of payment. As early as 9000 BC, both grain and cattle were used as money. Well, you can take the grain and the cattle and eat it. In fact, you can grind the grain into bread or a bun, and turn the cattle into meat and make yourself a hamburger. How many hamburgers an hour would you be willing to work for? The salt is one of the oldest forms of payment in the world, harking back to the barter system. In ancient Rome, the soldiers were paid part of their salary in salt. That's where the word comes from. The Latin word salarium linked employment, salt, and soldiers. Have you ever heard the saying, that guy is worth his salt? Turmeric, which is a spice wrapped in coconut fibers, it seems more like something you'd find on the Cooking Channel or the Food Network. But in the Solomon Islands, it passes for currency. In Central America and Mexico, coca beans were a delectable form of payment. And then we get gold. Now, you can use gold to make jewelry. It stays shiny no matter what. It's soft and it's a little easier to work with. And for some mysterious reason, it's valued more than life itself. But why? You can't eat gold. Gold will lay there on the shelf while your house burns down and not lift a finger to help. So what is it that makes it so valuable? Think about it. What makes a dollar bill worth a dollar? Yes, you can buy $1 worth of whatever you're looking for at the store, but why is it that we use pieces of paper to purchase anything? The value of $1 is based on people's belief that it's worth $1 and nothing more. But it's a lot easier to walk into a store with a pocket full of dollar bills than, say, dragging a goat behind you and try and purchase your groceries with some animal. At one time, if you walked into a bank and said, "I want to exchange this dollar bill for some gold," you'd leave the bank with $1 worth of gold, about 1/20th of an ounce. Gold was amongst the first metals to be mined because it commonly occurs in its native form just about everywhere on the planet. It's beautiful, it's imperishable, and because exquisite items can be made from it. Artisans of ancient civilizations used gold lavishly in decorating tombs and temples, and gold objects made more than 5,000 years ago have been found in Egypt. If you carve a statue and cover it with gold, it will be shiny all the time. You don't have to get your servants to go around polishing it. Ancient civilizations appeared to have obtained their supplies of gold from various depots in the Middle East. Mines in the region of the Upper Nile, near the Red Sea, and the Nubian Desert area supplied much of the gold used by the Egyptian pharaohs. When these mines could no longer meet their demands, elsewhere were looked for, possibly in Yemen and South Africa. Some say the ancients took to the sea and sailed west. They found their way to South America, where there is a ready supply of gold. This may have been the basis for the story of King Solomon's mine. Of course, the experts will tell you this could never happen. People back then were too stupid to build a ship and sail it out beyond the accepted limits of their world. The flat earth idea wasn't all that well accepted. Isaiah 40:22. It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants therefore are as grasshoppers. Aristotle realized the earth was round as far back as 330 BC, and knowledge of the spherical earth gradually began to spread beyond the Hellenistic world from then on. Really, what would have prevented a ship sailing due west until they ran into the coast of South America? There are legends about such travel taking place, but the so-called experts have based their careers on saying you just can't do it. They have books out saying they know better, and if evidence is out there that says they don't really know everything, the experts will do whatever it takes to protect their theories. Now I can see someone wanting to make some fancy jewelry, and so he'd look around for someone who's willing to dig a hole in the ground to find the gold, so it could be turned into something fancy to wear around town. The guy digging the hole would be paid in maybe grain or vegetables, and then the jeweler would sell his wares, maybe for a cow or two, to some rich guy who wanted to impress his neighbors. But then you get some people who want the gold just so they can have gold. Go out to a hot place and start digging a hole in the ground. Find some gold, put it in a nice, neat little sack, and then bury it in the ground. Someone is a bit confused. As people began to build houses together as a means of protection, at some point someone who was tired of working for a living stepped forward and said, "I'll be in charge around here. You folks get out there and work while I sit here and make sure you do it." Surprisingly, the other folks in town didn't band together and run this clown out of town. As the world began to develop, these so-called leaders began to refer to themselves as kings. In Genesis 14:1, "And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar." As you can see, kings were referred to way back in the early days of the Bible. I can understand someone who can make decisions that would lead to the rest of the townsfolk living a long, happy life being worth the title of king. But some of these leaders made life miserable for their subjects, and the subjects let them get away with it. Why? Well, the king had all the gold, and he used that gold to pay an army to keep the town folks under control. As kings developed kingdoms, their obsession with gold increased. "I want all of that yellow shiny stuff. Go find it and bring it here now." This would be the decree of the king. The history of gold begins way back in the earliest days of man. There's no hard archaeological evidence to show when and where man first encountered the yellow metal. We can only guess as to who it might have been or why they picked up a bright shiny rock and took it home. Fossil experts have found bits of gold in Spanish caves used by the Paleolithic man about 40,000 BC. Some say that gold was first discovered around that time. One idea states that about 6000 BC, someone got around to melting the shiny rock and getting the gold into one big chunk. Now we're going to take a brief pause here, play a couple of commercials and station identification, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about gold and money some more, so stay tuned. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 1002 Iturbide, suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and sometimes muffins and cookies. It's a great place to meet your friends for a conversation or curl up in the corner with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. And don't forget, Christmas is coming. There's always a few people you just don't know what to get them. How about a book or two? And check out some of my writings at Amazon.com. Such classics as Flying Saucers Attack Walmart or This Sucks. I have humor and I have horror, so check it out. Just look for Chris James, This Sucks, and you'll find a link to all of my books at, where else? Amazon.com. Now getting back to money, there's another branch of science that found that the pharaohs and temple priests used the metal to adorn ancient Egypt circa 3000 BC. Surprisingly, early Egyptians didn't use gold as a form of currency, but they used barley as a form of barter instead. The first use of gold as money was about 700 BC, and it was claimed by the citizens of a kingdom called Lydia, which is part of western Turkey today. In Asia Minor, in 600 BC, the Persian Empire owned most of the world's gold at that time, and they struck gold coins called darics in huge quantities. Unfortunately, there are few of them around today. Carthage, a powerful city and state in North Africa, also was a major player in gold coins. The Phoenician Empire took advantage of gold deposits on the Iberian Peninsula and struck coins called staters, which were made from electrium, which is a gold and silver alloy. After its origins in Asia Minor, the concept of coinage began to spread throughout Europe, but it took a while for gold to catch on as the metal of choice. Greece had very little gold compared to Persia, and what gold they did own was held in reserve rather than turning it into coins. And Persia's daric was the primary gold coin circulating in the Greek city-states. What few coins the Greeks minted were made from silver. They only used gold when their silver supplies were depleted. The silver continued to be the focus of European coinage as the Roman Empire ascended to power in the late 4th and 3rd centuries BC. Rome accumulated great wealth in gold through its conquests, including the vast deposits of the Iberian Peninsula, formerly held by Carthage. But like the Greeks, the Romans held most of their gold in reserve, and they struck coins out of gold only in an emergency. In the 2nd century BC, the Roman Senate granted their generals the right to strike coins from captured silver and gold so they could pay the soldiers. It was a lot easier to make your payroll right there than to have to transport the gold all the way back to Rome, mint the coins, and then transport it all the way back to the front line, and usually this would be through hostile territory. Just make your money right there in camp. Julius Caesar continued his military right to strike coins after becoming Caesar of the Roman Empire in the late 1st century BC. His aureus was the first Roman gold coin not struck out of necessity and made circulating gold coins more common. In the 1st century AD, Emperor Nero further expanded gold coins by continuing to strike an aureus and adding a gold quernius, which was half the value of the aureus. Both coins used almost pure gold, and they were issued in large quantities. When they say they struck gold coins, what they mean is they literally hit them with a hammer. Some big guy with lots of muscles would come along with a huge hammer that had the negative of the coin molded on the face. A measured amount of gold or silver would be placed on top of a die, and the muscle-bound individual would swing the hammer and slam the precious metal between hammer and die. The coins were not very spherical. Most were kind of an ovoid shape or just kind of a squashed-looking thing. This led to a bit of a problem. A merchant gets his hands on a bag full of gold coins, each worth the same amount due to being the same weight in gold. He could then sit in his tent and carefully carve a bit of gold off the edge of each coin. Since they're all different shapes, who would ever know? If the dishonest merchant did this enough, he would wind up with an extra bag full of gold shavings worth its weight in gold. And if he was not the only one doing this, eventually the gold coin would no longer be worth their face value because they no longer had the right amount of gold. Gold coins don't belong to the person holding them, but to whoever's face is on them. So if you got caught carving the edge off of Caesar's coins, you'd eventually get nailed to a post somewhere. When you run your hand along the edge of a quarter today, those ridges you feel are a direct result of coin manufacturers wanting to stop people from carving off the edges. On the island of Yap in Micronesia, the rhinestone is the heaviest legal tender on the earth. The coins are rather large circular stones with a hole in the center. They're anywhere from 5 to 20 feet in diameter. These bizarre coins derive their value not from monetary or fiscal policy, but rather from their size, weight, and the effort it would take to move them. The bigger the stone, the harder it is to move, so therefore the more value it holds. In Canada, they have a $1 million coin, which weighs approximately 220 pounds. It's made out of mostly silver and some gold. Even though it's a $1 million coin, its value is nearly $2 million because of the amount of gold and silver it's made from. Next time you have a decision to make, try flipping this sucker. Those of you out there that collect coins, Just think, your coin collection will never be complete now. Think this is an over-the-top coin? Australia, always looking to go too far, has also come out with a $1 million coin. It's about the same size as the one from Canada, but Australia's coin is all gold. 2,231 pounds. It is valued at well over $50 million. Now, the Incas were fond of gold and silver, but not as a form of money. They used it for ornaments and decorations to their temples and palaces. They also made jewelry because it was shiny and it was easy to work with. Many objects were made of solid gold. Emperor Atahualpa had a throne made of 15-karat gold that weighed 183 pounds. This was just his portable throne. The Inca were one tribe of many in the region, where they conquered and assimilated all of their neighbors. Gold and silver may have been demanded as a tribute from the conquests. The Inca also practiced basic mining, and as the Andes Mountains are rich in minerals, had accumulated a great deal of gold and silver. Most of it was in the form of jewelry, ornamentation, and decorations, and artifacts for various temples. 1532, when the Spanish conquistadors arrived on the scene, led by Francisco Pizarro, they captured Emperor Atahualpa. Atahualpa offered to fill a large room, half full with gold and twice with silver, in order to pay his ransom. Gold and silver began arriving daily, brought by the emperor's subjects. Being a bunch of greedy creeps, though, the conquistadors strangled Atahualpa to death anyway. They weren't satisfied with 13,000 pounds of gold or 28,000 pounds of silver. Where did all this treasure come from to begin with? It came from the Incas mining the mountains of South America. Now, 20% of all loot taken from the conquests, we could call it stolen or the spoils of war. Well, 20% was reserved for the King of Spain. This was referred to as the Cuanto Real, or Royal Fifth. The Pizarro brothers, knowing the power and the reach of the king, were very careful about weighing and cataloging all treasure taken so the crown would receive its share. All the gold and silver decorations and jewelry was melted down and then cast into bars. In 1534, Francisco Pizarro had to send his brother, Hernando, back to Spain because he didn't trust any of his men to deliver the gold and silver to the king. A handful of the most beautiful pieces of Inca metalwork were sent along intact. They were displayed for a time in Spain before being melted down as well. 1533, Pizarro and his conquistadors arrived at the city of Cuzco, which was the actual heart of the Inca Empire. They were greeted as liberators because they had killed Atahualpa, who had recently been at war with his brother, Huascar, over which of the siblings would rule the empire. The Spanish weren't very interested in friendship. They were there for the treasure, and so they sacked the city mercilessly. They searched every home, temple, palace for any gold and silver. They found as much loot here as they had when they conquered Atahualpa's cities. Each of the conquistadors would receive a share of the spoils. When Atahualpa was murdered, there were far fewer men to divide the gold amongst. This time each man received less for his troubles than he had before. Some fabulous works of art were taken. Things like the 12 extraordinarily realistic life-size entries made of gold and silver. There was also a statue of a woman made of solid gold which weighed 65 pounds. They took vases skillfully crafted of ceramic and gold. All of these artistic treasures were melted down and then cast into gold bars. Gold and silver began to flood into Spain. Not just the treasures taken by the conquistadors, but once South America had been colonized, the locals were put to work digging new mines in search of gold and silver. The precious metals were sent to Spain and used to keep the empire going. It cost a lot of money to keep all the conquests under control. A gold doubloon was worth 32 reals. A piece of 8 was worth 8 reals. 8 reals equaled 1 silver peso. The silver mine in Potosi, Bolivia, produced 41,000 metric tons of silver. Anytime anyone gets rich doing anything, people are going to flock to the scene to try to find their fortune as well. With all that gold flowing into Spain, the treasure seekers began to flock to the Americas looking to become rich. At that time, it was thought you needed a ship to get across the ocean and a sword to poke people with until they delivered. When these marauders showed up and began poking people, demanding riches, well, what could you do if the last guy had already taken everything? You come up with a story and hope these fools will go away and leave you alone. There's a city just over that hill. The streets are paved with gold. It's called El Dorado. Just keep walking west until you reach it. As time went by, the locals soon learned if you wanted to see the last of these Europeans, just keep telling them El Dorado is just over the next mountain range. They'll never come back. Over the next 200 years, thousands of men went staggering off into the jungles looking for this elusive city. Gold makes fools out of men. But why? What is it about gold that drains people's morals and scruples away? Why do people risk their lives looking for a shiny yellow rock? I understand that the shiny yellow rock is worth a lot of money, but why is it worth all that money? The stories persist today of piles of Inca gold hidden away in the mountains of South America. One story says that some of Atahualpa's ransom was squirreled away when word got out that the emperor had been killed. The dream of a line of Inca carrying gold bags somewhere out in the mountains keeps people out there today still looking. Then there's the legend of Ruminawe, one of the Inca generals who took tons of gold from the city of Quito and threw it into a lake to keep it out of the hands of the Spanish conquistadors. And there are stories of human sacrifice, where the chosen would be draped in gold and silver before being hurled into a cenote to appease some god or other. These stories fueled treasure hunters to dive down into these water-filled sinkholes, looking for the piles of gold, as well as a few human bones. People were driven to murder and madness, looking for hunks of yellow rock. Genesis 2:10 says, "In a river out of Eden to water the gardens, and from there it was divided and became 4 heads. The name of the first was Pishon, which surrounds all of the land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good." So even the Bible tells us gold is good, but the question remains, why? Well, we're going to take a break here, play a few commercials and station identification. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 1002 Eaterby Days, Suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and sometimes muffins and cookies. It's a great place to meet your friends for a conversation or curl up in the corner with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Truck. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanelza Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanelza Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. Be sure and check out my books at Amazon.com. Just type in my name at the top where it says search. Chris James, This Sucks. It's one of my books that you can possibly buy as a gift for one of the people you just don't know what to buy them. The book, This Sucks, is a humorous take on the vampire legends. It's a story about a soldier who gets employed by a young prince who simply wants to regain his throne. The young prince just happens to be named Vlad Tepes, and he also just happens to be a vampire. The story starts out in the 1400s. The prince becomes rather fond of the soldier that he'd hired. They become good friends as the story unfolds. Then, the main character, a guy named Rohimo, is mortally wounded in combat. Now, the prince has gotten really fond of this guy, and he doesn't want him to die because, well, he's his best friend. So, with no other way of keeping the man alive, he turns him into a vampire as well. Now, you know in the movies, when a man turns into a vampire, a 150-pound man turns into a 3-pound bat. You ever wonder what happened to the rest of him? Well, in my book, when a man turns into a bat, he turns into a 150-pound bat. And he doesn't automatically know how to fly because we don't know how to fly. So what does he do? He starts throwing himself off the castle wall in a means to learn how to fly. It's just a good thing he's immortal because, well, he doesn't fly very well. If you'd be interested in that book, it's called This Sucks, and like I said, it's available at Amazon.com. So, let's get on with the show. Zachariah Sitchin was born in July 11th, 1920. He was a Russian-born American author of books proposing an explanation for the human origins involving ancient astronauts. The Anunnaki came to the Earth thousands of years ago looking for gold. They wanted it to save the atmosphere of their home planet, Nibiru. The idea was the gold would be pounded into a powder and then launched into space to form a reflective blanket to deflect radiation away from their planet. Kind of like the idea of the chemtrails that the government is pumping out today. Sitchin got his idea from cuneiform writings found in ancient Samaria. The Anunnaki arrived here and they began mining. Now the guys doing all the work, they got tired of digging and they started to complain. Now the folks in charge didn't want a revolt on their hands, so they got their scientists busy messing around with the DNA of some of the local inhabitants who were living in caves and probably eating dirt. Once a viable humanoid was created, These offspring of the Anunnaki were sent into the mines to dig for gold. You could say they were born to dig for gold. Could this kind of explain why people go nuts when looking for gold? If you find what the boss is looking for, you get a treat. If not, maybe you get a good pounding. When the bosses had decided they had enough gold and it was time to return to Nibiru, they set about destroying all the humans they had created. However, one of the Anunnaki had kind of grown fond of these little humans, and he decided to help them escape from the global annihilation. Mr. Sitchin died on October 9th, 2010. If you watch the TV series Ancient Aliens, you'll hear him referred to at least 2 or 3 times in just about every episode. His books are also available at Amazon.com if you'd like to check them out and give them a read. What is gold really worth? It's worth whatever someone else is willing to pay for it. If no one wanted gold, you couldn't give it away. It's heavy and it takes up a lot of room. Since these yellow rocks were first pulled from the ground up until today, there has been 182,491 U.S. tons of gold collected in total. Anytime I cash a check at the bank, if the clerk asks me how I want my transaction, I'll usually say I want it in gold, to which I'll get a blank look. A dollar bill today will not buy $1 worth of gold because, to begin with, we're no longer on the gold standard. Second, the bank doesn't have any gold anywhere in it. And third, a dollar wouldn't buy very much gold, maybe a grain or two. Back in June 5th, 1933, the United States went off the gold standard when Congress enacted a joint resolution nullifying the right of creditors to demand payment in gold. There was also a run on the banks that led to the Great Depression. March 1933, Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank moratorium in order to prevent a run on the banks by consumers lacking confidence in the economy. People didn't trust banks because they were taking people's money, but they were very slow in giving it back, and when a person got behind at the bank, well, they'd seize their property. Roosevelt forbade banks to pay out gold or to export it. According to Keynesian economic theory, one of the best ways to fight off an economic downturn is to inflate the money supply. In other words, print more money. Increasing the amount of gold held by the Federal Reserve would in turn increase the power to inflate the money supply. Facing similar pressures, Britain had dropped the gold standard in 1931, and, well, Roosevelt had seen how they had managed. April 5th, 1933, Roosevelt ordered all gold coins and gold certificates in denomination of more than $100 to be turned in. It would be replaced with a different source of money. It required everyone to deliver all gold coins, gold bullion, gold certificates owned by them to the Federal Reserve by May 1st for the set price of $20.67 an ounce. By May 10th, the government had taken in $300 million of gold coin and $470 million of gold certificates. Did you ever wonder where all the gold that's supposed to be in Fort Knox came from? It was seized, in other words stolen, by the government. In 1934, the government increased the price of gold to 35 cents an ounce, effectively increasing the gold on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet by 69%. This increase in assets allowed the Federal Reserve to further inflate the money supply. It must be nice. I now declare that this piece of gold I have is now worth nearly twice as much, so therefore I have twice as much gold. Only the government can do something like that. The government held the $35 an ounce price until August 15, 1971, when President Richard Nixon announced the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed rate, thus completely abandoning the gold standard. Nixon wanted to print more money to keep the Vietnam War going. War is an expensive endeavor, and by just printing more cash, he could keep spending it. Then in 1974, President Gerald Ford signed legislation that permitted Americans once again to own gold. When you go to the bank and ask for a loan, does it seem as if you get the loan? Someone in the back room reaches into a huge sack full of money and pulls out a big old handful of bills, and then he puts them into your account? If only it were true. Instead, the loan officer types a number on a line that says you owe us this amount. Then he adds this number to your account, which once again is just a number written out on a computer screen. No actual cash ever changes hands, just numbers typed on a computer. Currently, there's more cash valued scattered about the planet than there is cash. It's all just numbers jotted down on computer screens. If all the amounts listed on computers were converted to money, there wouldn't be enough. The printers would have to go into overtime, and then we'd shortly run out of paper. There's far more cash value on computers than there is cash. Now, did you know you can print your own money? I'm not talking about counterfeiting. I'm talking about printing your own dollars. In Berkshire, Massachusetts, they have their own money. It's called Berkshires. You can get paid in Berkshires, and you can pay your bills in Berkshires, but only in that one town. Since 1991, they've printed their own money with colorful pictures of animals and things on it. The cash is only acceptable in the town of Berkshires and only at certain stores, but still, it's their own money. One North Carolina town is trying to become more self-sufficient by moving towards being able to feed, fuel, and finance itself. The town of Pittsboro houses the nation's largest biodiesel cooperative, a food co-op, a farmer's market, and most recently its own currency, the Pittsboro Plenty. Pittsboro is one of the number of communities across the country currently printing their own money in an attempt to support local business. Is this constitutionally legal? Well, not really. But has anyone ever been arrested? No. The Constitution says the Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. But our Congress doesn't do any of this. The Federal Reserve prints our money and decides how much it's worth, and then they charge us interest to use our money. So if you decide to go printing your own money, be sure to have plenty of local businesses in agreement that will take your bills, or else you're going to be stuck with a handful of monopoly money. We don't have any such denomination as the penny in the United States. That little round coin with Abraham Lincoln's head stamped on it is a cent. It is 1% of a dollar. The odd thing is it costs the United States 2.41 cents to make 1 cent. Why isn't a penny worth, or correction, why isn't a cent worth 2.41 cents since that's what it costs to make it? I don't know. The United States $100,000 bill has Woodrow Wilson printed on it. You're not going to see those in circulation, though. Nothing bigger than a $100 bill is currently being used. The Federal Reserve announced the removal of large denominations of United States currency from circulation on July 14, 1969. The $100 bill was the largest denomination left in circulation. Ben Franklin is the only person appearing on United States currency who was never a president. But then, without old Ben, the United States would never have been. There are now public policies against reissuing the $500 note. The idea is money launderers, tax evaders, and a variety of other lawbreakers who use currency in their criminal activity. Someone thinks the amount of illegal drugs sold or the amount of tax evasion would increase just as a consequence of the availability of larger bills. It is also believed the transportation of money across the border would become far easier since a person can carry more cash value with less bulk. Dr. Ron Paul, congressman from the state of Texas, said, "The Federal Reserve is secretly throwing around our money in unprecedented fashion. And it wasn't just the usual suspects like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, etc. It was the entire global banking cartel. Central banks throughout the world in Australia, Denmark, Japan, Mexico, Norway, South Korea, Sweden, Switzerland, and England. We are talking about trillions of dollars secretly pumped into global banks, hand-picked by a small, select group of bankers themselves, all for the benefit of those bankers and at the expense of everyone else. That $16 trillion they handed out to their friends, money that the rest of us now have to pay back, and to who? Why, the Federal Reserve, of course." Now, we're going to take a brief pause here and play a couple of commercials. We'll be right back after these important messages, so don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 1002 Eaterby Day, Suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and sometimes muffins and cookies. It's a great place to meet your friends for a conversation or curl up in the corner with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
We gotta say goodbye.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros, estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. People in general have been largely ignorant of how the Federal Reserve and our monetary and economic system works, which has given them more or less free rein to run the show any which way they pleased. Dr. Paul wanted to audit the Federal Reserve to find out what they've been doing with our money. On other occasions, when cashing a check, I'll ask the cashier for United States notes. And once again, I'll get a blank look. John Kennedy, had decided our economy was in jeopardy as long as the Federal Reserve was printing our money, so he decided to do something about it. On June 4th, 1963, a virtually unknown presidential decree, Executive Order 11110, was signed with the authority to basically strip the Federal Reserve Bank of its power to loan money to the United States federal government at interest. With the stroke of a pen, President Kennedy declared that the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank would soon be out of business. United States notes were issued as an interest-free, debt-free currency backed by silver reserves in the United States Treasury. They were our money, not belonging to some private bank owned by world bankers whose only loyalties were to themselves. Unfortunately, President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, and the United States notes he had issued were immediately taken out of circulation. Federal Reserve notes continue to serve as the legal tender of the United States. Now, the Executive Order 11110 has never been repealed, amended, or superseded by any subsequent executive order. In simple terms, it's still valid today. When John Kennedy signed this order, it returned the United States federal government, specifically the Treasury Department, the constitutional power to create and issue money, without going through a privately owned Rothschild Federal Reserve Bank. A myth that all Americans live with is the charade known as the Federal Reserve. It comes as a shock to many to discover that it is not an agency of the United States government. The name Federal Reserve Bank was designed to deceive, and it still does. It is neither federal, nor is it owned by the government. It is privately owned bank. It pays its own postage, like any other corporation. Its employees are not civil service. Its physical property is held under private deeds and is subject to local taxation. Government property, as you know, is not taxed. It is an engine that has created private wealth that is unimaginable, even to the most financially sophisticated. It has enabled an imperial elite to manipulate our economy for its own agenda, and enlisted the government itself as its enforcer. It controls the time, dictates business, affects our homes and practically everything in which we are interested. It takes powerful force to maintain an empire, and this one is no different. The concerns of the leadership of the Federal Reserve and its secretive international benefactors appear to go well beyond currency and interest rates. 1906, J.P. Morgan began spreading the word around town that the banks didn't have enough money to cover all their deposits. And he said any intelligent man should draw out his cash before the banks ran dry. There was an immediate run on the banks, and soon the nation was in a depression. 1910, the Federal Reserve Bank was created by J.P. Morgan and several of his international banking friends. They went to Congress and said, in order to prevent another depression that was caused by him in the first place, the government should allow this private bank to handle all the monetary concerns of the United States, and this would prevent any more financial difficulties. I'm sure a lot of cash was given to the congressmen responsible for making these decisions. After that, we had the Great Depression of 1930. The Fed did nothing to stave it off. We had the recent recession that the Fed did nothing to help with either. What did the Federal Reserve do? Do you all remember quantitative easing? It simply printed more money. Well, not really. What they did was they took their account balance and they added a bunch of zeros at the end of the amount and then passed the interest on to us. Then they used this new balance to purchase bonds from other banks. The dollar was devaluated because there were now more of them to go around. Quantitative easing did such a lousy job on the economy that the Federal Reserve did it again. And once again, the dollar lost its standing in the world economy. So what should the Federal Reserve do since number 1 and number 2 nearly broke the United States? Quantitative easing and number 3 was announced. So this is why our economy is in such a lousy shape today. The people of the United States owe the Federal Reserve interest on all the money the Federal Reserve created to buy the bonds from other banks. This is the same as if your neighbor goes out and gets a mortgage on his house, and you get stuck paying the interest on the loan. The Deutschmark, the German monetary system in 1923, was so screwed up, people gave the bills to their kids to play with, or they used them for wallpaper. The Deutschmark cost less than wallpaper at the time. We have a bit of a problem with counterfeiting here in the United States. The Secret Service, which is charged with protecting the president as well as our money, can't catch the suspects even though they know where the illegal printer is living. The illegal bills are being printed in North Korea. Now, have you ever received a banknote with writing on it? Or has someone drawn on a bill you've gotten? It is against the law. USC Title 18 says you're not supposed to deface or write on any United States currency. However, does this really apply to Federal Reserve notes since they belong to a private bank? And how about all that gold in Fort Knox? Is it really there or not? Last time anyone looked, anyone not working for the Federal Reserve, was in 1974. I watched that video and it kind of looked like a joke. The director of the U.S. Mint, Mary Brooks, acted as if she were either drunk or someone had a gun aimed at her. They opened one vault and showed a pile of gold bars. One room out of, 20? And why is it no one is allowed to check to be sure the gold is really there? I know they say it's for security reasons, but how about our security knowing for a fact the gold is actually there and not in some private banker's personal vault? We have an entire military fort surrounding the place. You mean to tell me a bunch of our representatives can't be allowed inside and see if our gold is still there? This is kind of like you go to the bank and you say, I've got $1,000 in my bank account and I want to see it. The banker looks at his computer and he says, yep, it's still there. You say, yes, but I want to see it. And he says, trust me, it's there, but you can't see it for security reasons. That's the same thing as what they're saying about the gold at Fort Knox. Now, personally, I don't think the gold is there. I think some Federal Reserve banker took it and now we can't be allowed to see an empty vault because that would lead to a bunch of angry United States citizens rounding up all these Federal Reserve bankers and arresting them. But that's just me. In Terry Pratchett's book, Making Money, Mr. Pratchett does a great job showing how our monetary system actually works. I highly recommend you check out his book at Amazon.com. That's Terry Pratchett, Making Money. So what do you think? Is the Federal Reserve there to keep our money safe or to make themselves rich? Is there actually any gold in Fort Knox? And who wants to get their hands on one of those $1 million coins from Australia? And just remember what Dave Ramsey said, act your wage. Now, before we go tonight, I just wanted to read a few pages out of one of my latest books called The BAG Company, also known as The Bag Company, for those of you having a hard time deciding what you want to buy your relatives for Christmas. The book is about a unlikely group of psychics and semi-psychics and some just plain fake psychics who have all banded together as a means of making a living. Say you are a werewolf in need of help, or a ghost looking for someone to talk to. Who do you turn to? The Bogus Anomalous Group, that's who. The BAG Company is a group of psychics and near psychics and a few just plain pretend psychics, ready and willing to help out as long as there's a buck to be made. When Pam Bogus needed a job, it fell on her uncle to provide this untrained, unskilled teen with something resembling a job. Pam was nowhere near ready for what lay ahead in her life. People in need of psychic advice or card readings or whatever kind of other sensory kind of help a person can imagine. The monster living in the basement is intent on making Pam into a juicy little morsel, while the demon released from a netherworlds just wants to rend her limb from limb. The psychic vampire down the block is draining her kid, while the old cemetery is home to the last battle of the Civil War. Spills and chills, a car chase in a pickup truck, unbridled animals, and lots of nastiness. Come along as Pam Bogus tries to earn her keep and stay alive at the same time. It's called the BAG Company, and like all my other books, it is available at Amazon.com. So check it out, and I hope you enjoy my books. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. I'm not too sure if Brian will be with us or not. Hopefully he will have been recovered enough by next Saturday. Been trying to get him on the show for 2 weeks now. If not, if Brian is unavailable still, I will be doing a show about the Dyatlov Pass mystery. So tune in next Saturday to either listen to the Dyatlov Pass mystery or Brian MP talking about Bigfoot. Until next week, this is Chris James. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?